Hey, it's Mike here, and today, B12 in plant foods, a video that shouldn't have anybody changing their behavior. Vegans should still be eating B12 fortified foods and taking B12 supplements, but this is a rare situation where I was so intrigued researching a topic that I just kept building research on it, and then when the time came to actually make a video, my only choice was to make a video about this. My paradigm on this was just busted over and over again, especially with respect to a lot of traditional foods out there and research that I had not seen. And so we just, in the pursuit of knowledge, hopefully you're as interested in this as me, let's just go. Again, just super disclaimer, don't stop taking B12 supplements or getting fortified foods as a vegan. I am not going to be betting my red blood cell count on any of this information, but I think that there's a compelling case that more B12 has been eaten from plant foods throughout human history than we had thought. Why does this matter? It doesn't really matter that much to me. I don't care if we were eating all our B12 from meat in the past. I still want to know, what the science says and what the answers are. And it is the case that we show lower diseases with plant-based diets, which means it appears we've adapted to that. Maybe we were eating very little meat, but even if you think that we were more meat-based, there certainly were long periods of time, even beyond B12 circulation, where we probably weren't getting enough B12 from meat. I mean, just Google B12 content of meat. You get this USDA source saying 0.5 micrograms per 3 ounces or 85 grams. I'm sure a lot of meats are higher, but that means that failing to reach B12 intake from meat on a weekly, monthly basis and on was probably likely. So can we find other sources of B12? I've talked about water in the past, and even though we can get around 2 micrograms per liter or whatever, that's probably not the case everywhere. There's a lot of variation. And so I'm like, are there any other sources out there? Well, from this 2022 study, which was essentially focused on finding vegan forms of active B12, they say, quote, "It is possible that daily recommendations for B12 can be met by a varied diet containing non-animal B12 food sources." It's definitely possible, but it might not be smart at this point, as we will cover. But I do want to back up and look at where a lot of the confusion happened historically with B12 in plant foods, and that has to do with analogs. We'll just cover this really quickly. You have your actual active types of B12, and then you have these analogs or coronoids, sometimes referred to as cobamides. These analogs are a problem because they can raise B12 blood levels without actually doing what they need to, and actually potentially prevent real B12 from doing their job. You might have heard, spirulina has B12. Well, it appears that up to 83% of that B12 is actually analogs, which could be blocking the real B12. And because of older measuring techniques, this was being mixed up with real B12. Thankfully, now, the more recent studies are using high-performance liquid chromatography, which will quantify those 4 bioactive forms of B12. But even better than measuring B12 in food, real human studies looking at methylmalonic acid, which is a measurement of B12 activity in the body, is the best. And we need a bunch more of those studies on all the foods we're gonna get to, but let's just get going. You might already be aware of the 2 plant foods that we know of that create B12 with a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their tissues. That's duckweed/water lentils and sea buckthorn. We have several studies showing that there's quite high levels of B12 in active forms in these plants. That duckweed grows pretty worldwide and is in some Asian cuisines, but it doesn't still appear to be eaten all over the world. Sea buckthorn can be found across Europe and in Asia and a little bit in Africa. Who knows the historical role with B12? But there are a few more studies that kind of blew my mind, and the first one that I hadn't seen was this 2016 German one that used that type of chromatography, and they found some active B12 in random plants I wasn't expecting. For example, quite a bit in couch grass and a bit in a plant called horseheel, also known as elf dock, which is in the sunflower family. If there aren't any analogs in that couch grass, 10 grams of dried material would reach your daily allowance. And yes, it has actually been dried and used with flour to make bread. So, who knows if people got B12 that way accidentally. I'd love to see more studies on those, but what I think is more likely to be, what was bridging the gap throughout ancient human history for B12 is fermented foods, which we just consumed in such a large variety in actual solid foods as well as fermented drinks. We did this for preservation in times before refrigeration, virtually all of human history, as well as to fight pathogens. There were times where we were drinking like essentially lightly alcoholic beer as water to prevent disease. And the preserved food that really launched this whole investigation for me was from that Polish study I mentioned recently, where they just were looking at popular products in a market to see how much B12 they had for vegetarians and vegans to get. And pickled parsley juice just totally destroyed with its B12. Using that chromatography, they found 50 micrograms of bioactive B12 per liter. I'm not going to be drinking a liter of that, but still, it got me wondering, looking around at all the fermented foods that humans tend to eat around the world, how much B12 would we actually find? I wish I had time-traveling nanorobots to take samples. I don't. And this is where we have to talk about the B12 variation in fermented foods and why it occurs, because from that same Polish study, the sauerkraut had virtually no B12. However, looking at other studies like this one that looked at 4 different types of sauerkraut in Japan, 3 didn't really have any, but 1 had 0.5 micrograms per 100 grams, again, of active B12 through chromatography. And remember, the USDA says that a lot of meat just has 0.5 micrograms per 85 grams, so very comparable there, a nutritionally significant amount. And this really is due to the type of bacteria as well as just how it is cultured, how long it is cultured, etc. Because if you purposefully add a type of propionate bacteria to sauerkraut, you get up to about 7 micrograms per 100 grams of sauerkraut. And some lactobacillus also make B12, so you can realize, the possibilities here are endless. Another fermented food that some vegans believe is a source of B12 is tempeh, which again exposes the variation that we can see here, because, go to the store, according to the USDA, we're looking at 0.08 micrograms per 100 grams, according to the USDA, but go to Jakarta, Indonesia, and your average is about 2 micrograms of B12 per 100 gram servings, although that's a little bit older. Analogs weren't measured in that one. But this exposes a trend that we can see where homemade versions of fermented foods are gonna have more B12 than the commercial sterilized, cranked out fast versions of a food. And that brings me to South Korea. This study looked at the B12 amount in some fermented traditional Korean foods, like some soy-based ones, which when made in a homemade setting by people had a reasonable amount. We're talking between 0.7 and almost 2 micrograms per 100 grams. But then you look at the factory made ones and their range goes down to virtually none at all. The researchers pointed to the longer fermentation times of homemade products compared to the non-homemade products to explain the difference. However, it could also just be that garden vegetables have more cobalamin, and when you add cobalamin to a fermentation process where you have B12 creating bacteria, you can increase the amount of B12 that is made, obviously. And then, of course, just hygiene and sterilization in factories lowers the diversity and chances that there's gonna be a B12 producing bacteria in there. And get this, from this Korean Centenarian study, they estimated that about 30% of their B12 came from plant-based products, talking fermented foods and other ones, which is crazy. Anyway, one particular type of fermented foods that people don't talk about as much, which is essentially ubiquitous in traditional cultures, is alkaline fermented foods, ones that, don't go acidic, they go up in pH. As this study mentions, this is a common practice in places like Africa, of course, where we initially evolved. And a lot of times this is fermented legumes, so tempeh would qualify here. And here is a chart showing various alkaline fermented foods, and a lot of them actually have B12 despite being plant-based. Dawadawa is one name for the fermented locust beans from Africa, which allegedly has B12, and I had to dig and I found this study here, which in a chart and way back of the study claims that these fermented locust beans had 450 micrograms of B12 per 100 grams. It seems like it's a typo. We need to repeat this, but if it's anywhere near that, these little fermented bean balls could have prevented a lot of B12 deficiency across the continent of Africa over the years. And it keeps going with B12 foods from this paper, quote, "Nutritionally significant amounts of vitamin B12 were also found in the Indonesian fermented food Ontjom. Probably said that wrong, but apparently it's a little bit like tempeh. All right, now for drinks, and a lot of these did surprise me, fermented ones. We can look to that Polish study, which just quickly referenced a type of fermented black tea out of Japan, which allegedly contained up to 20 micrograms per liter of tea drink. So like half a cup of it would reach your daily requirement. This is unusual though, and it is important to note from this study that non-fermented normal black tea and other teas don't cut it. We're talking having to eat like 100 to 200 grams of straight leaves to get enough. And get this, the wildly popular drink kombucha, which is from various teas, appears to be a major possible source of B12. You may have seen labels like this saying it contains 8,000% of your daily requirement for B12, despite not having it in the added ingredients. What's going on? From this study, with black tea as the base, they claim 0.8 milligrams per milliliter, which would be completely insane. I'm pretty sure they meant micrograms, which would line up with that 8,000%. And I have to cautiously assume that the varying B12 claims on kombucha product labels is the direct result of modern testing for active B12. So don't assume it has it unless it specifically says it on the label. This GT kombucha bottle only claims 20% of daily value. Moving on. And in terms of fermented rice dishes, I found a bunch of totally unbacked claims, like this dude on YouTube just being like, fermented rice, amazing source of B12 with these random vegetables added. That's a little bit less compelling than how this study took particular strains of lactobacillus from an East Indian tribe's rice drink that is fermented, and that was very effective at producing B12 at 5 micrograms per 100 grams of finished product, though they didn't actually test the rice drink, which is annoying. And as this study mentions, palm wine, which is traditionally consumed in Africa, had a surprisingly large amount of B12, which equates to approximately 20 to 30 micrograms per 100 milliliters. Super epic, and more data needed. Then we have another Indian study that looked at fermented date syrup. I'm not sure if you really drink it or whatever, but even though they didn't test the actual B12 content of it, which really frustrates me, they found that it raised B12 levels and improved blood cell counts. I don't know. I was trying to corroborate this, and moving back to just straight up solid food in the form of plants, it appears from this study that certain date varieties happen to have a notable amount of B12, at least according to this study. Up to 2 micrograms per 100 grams, or 0. You never know. B12 is fun and predictable. Now we need to move on to the mystifying, sometimes paradoxical potential form of B12 known as purple laver, or nori, which is just what you wrap around sushi. Levels have been reported in excess of 100 micrograms per 100 grams of material. And, studies like this one say, nori is the most suitable vitamin B12 source for vegetarians presently available. Okay. And they found that by feeding nori, urinary methylmalonic acid secretion went down to undetectable at 20 days when given nori, in rats at least. However, we have conflicting data in humans, and it might have to do with the preparation style, but first we have this interesting study that really just looked at 6 young vegans who were on a sort of particular Japanese whole food vegan diet that included nori, despite having been vegan for way longer than their liver could recirculate. Their serum B12 levels and blood cell counts, hemoglobin, etc. were totally fine, no deficiencies. However, we have to be really careful here because, as Jack Norris of veganhealth.org warned, based on a 1999 study, quote, the results indicate that B12 in raw nori can be changed into harmful inactive B12 analogs by drying, and that dried nori decreases B12 status. Yeah, the study he mentions found that by drying nori, you can jump those analogs from just 25% of total cobalamin to like 65% of total cobalamin, which totally changes the equation. When you then feed those to people, we ended up with worse urinary methylmalonic acid in the dried group, and then the raw group stayed about the same. And these weren't vegans. Their status was likely normal, so who knows what would happen with somebody who already had low. Maybe it would have gone up in that case. We don't know. But for the most interesting study, we have this one, which took 10 vegans on sort of like a whole food diet with nori and mushrooms, which we'll get to. and 20 vegans who were just supplemented B12. And the results are interesting. Those non-supplemented vegans were getting about 3.4 micrograms per day. 2.4, again, is how much we need. And they got exactly 2.4 from nori, the rest from mushrooms. And the results were the non-supplemented nori vegans were the worst of the group, and the B12 supplement vegans were the best of the group for B12 status. Looking to methylmalonic acid, those nori vegans were just skirting the line of 370, which is the cutoff for deficiency. Their homocysteine and their blood markers were normal in the nori vegans, but the conclusion of the study is like, yeah, with nori you can like skirt the line and barely keep yourself from having a bad deficiency. Maybe going further than the 8 months of the study, they don't know. But the study says they got 0.7 micrograms per day from mushrooms. So what about mushrooms? They're not exactly plants, but still, they're considered a vegan food. Well, I think they're a little bit sketchy. A lot of mushrooms just have, virtually no B12 or low amounts of B12. But shiitake is proposed to be higher. However, you would still have to eat quite a lot of shiitake to get enough. And again, it's a variability thing. You can have a 30-gram serving of dried shiitake and get either 6 micrograms of B12, which would be awesome, or like virtually none. However, two more interesting points. There doesn't appear to be a concern with B12 analogs in these mushrooms. And also, people think, oh, it's the manure and the bacteria in that. Well, we're still getting these results from direct log-grown shiitake mushrooms. And finally, I have to go deep into theoretical land here because I found a study that I thought was really interesting about analogs that I just had to share for people who want to nerd out. And that is this one saying that some of these analogs might actually work like B12 does in terms of one of the main cofactor processes that B12 actually works with, and that is methylmalonyl-CoA mutase mamut. Just like my little dog Diego, it's mamut. He really is a mutt. Everyone thinks he's a Yorkie, but he's mostly Chihuahua. Anyway, so this MMUT process requires B12 to create succinyl-CoA, which from Oregon State, quote, plays an important role in the production of energy from lipids and protein, and is also required for the synthesis of hemoglobin. So this is most of what B12 does, with blood cells and anemia, etc. The other cofactor thing is homocysteine. Anyway, the study found that MMUT is able to use several, but not all of these B12 analogs or cobamides as cofactors in a petri dish, at least. So we don't know if these analogs would get where they need to go to do what they would need to do, but they also found out which analogs work and which analogs don't work. A lot of these are in food, and the context of the study was looking for a solution for people with genetic disorders where they might not be able to use that normal B12 here. Maybe you could plug in a medication in the form of a B12 analog. Anyway, we've gone way too deep into the theoretical. This most likely won't matter for anybody. We can still get cheap B12 supplements, and even if we wanted to, in a vegan society, for example, have a system where B12 is just naturally baked in to the food products, you can, pun not intended, but good pun, you can actually, have B12 in bread, for example, by adding that B12 creating fermenting bacteria. A study also found that if you put B12 into hydroponic growth medium, you can get like your RDA and 2 lettuce leaves. So yeah, any fermented food could theoretically have B12 created by itself, or of course it's not that big of a deal to just add synthetic B12. It still gets the job done and it's cheap. We could just add it to the water supply and not have to worry about it unless people filter it out. In the end, we have a lot of interesting things going on here. We have those plants that in a symbiotic relationship with bacteria create B12 in their tissues. We have these fermented foods that if they have the right type of bacteria, which it appears traditionally a lot of them do have, especially when in a homemade non-sterilized situation, can create that B12 in an amount that will make a difference. Maybe those locust beans have a ton. Maybe that fermented rice drink has enough. Maybe those dates on their own have enough B12 in some cases, which was a shocker to me. Nori, especially depending on the preparation method, is a bit sketchy. I certainly wouldn't rely on it. Again, not gonna bet my blood cells on it. But finally, I would love to see a ton of methylmalonic acid studies on different plants in humans to see if, these are bioactively working. But there's basically no financial incentive to do that because, again, we have these safe and cheap supplements and fortified foods, which I have to reiterate just Just take those, please. All right, I hope you're at least 10% as interested in this as me, because I found this just a super fascinating topic to look through. There's just so much missed data out there, which is showing a bit of a different picture. And so I'd love to see more fermented foods traditionally created around the world measured. And let me know down below what you think. Is there any crazy traditional food that you know about that would be cool to see, or just your thoughts in general? And of course, feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.